Good morning, I'm Pat Kiernan. This is Pat's Papers, our morning look at what's in the nation's newspapers. We've been looking through the headlines, and here's what we found for you today. President-elect Obama's interview with Tom Brokaw is a front-page story in many of the nation's newspapers. The Meet the Press interview was the first time Obama has criticized the White House publicly since his election. He accused President Bush of not doing enough to prevent home foreclosures. They were praying for the auto industry in Detroit yesterday. That story is on the front page of the New York Times, along with a photo of two SUVs that were placed up on the altar at the Greater Grace Temple Pentecostal Church. There's a story in the Times and another in the Washington Post note that the latest plan from congressional Democrats would give the car makers $15 billion in emergency loans, but also grant the federal government broad authority to manage a massive restructuring. Two other items on the Obama transition. He named retired four-star General Eric Shinseki to head the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Shinseki was moved aside in 2003 when he was Army Chief of Staff after he stepped out of line with Donald Rumsfeld's position on troop allocation in Iraq. And maybe it'll be different next time, but in the final days of the Bush administration, analysts expect the U.S. will not commit to a new international treaty on carbon emissions. Some supporters of tougher standards had hoped that Obama would send his own representatives to the meetings. News about the newspaper business, as reported by a newspaper caught up in this story, the Chicago Tribune. Among the papers reporting that its parent, the Tribune Company, is consulting bankruptcy lawyers. Real estate magnate Sam Zell took the company private a year ago. He took on a huge debt load to do it, and he has been pushing for a restructuring of that debt. Veterans on the front page of the Los Angeles Times, 67 years after the bombing of Pearl Harbor in Honolulu. A minute's silence was held at 7:55 in the morning, the time when Japanese bombs first hit U.S. soil in 1941. In Hawaii, on the front page of the Honolulu Advertiser, there is a tease for coverage on this story, but the actual story is inside the newspaper. The main front page story is, in fact, one about the economy, about the potential tourism impact of beach erosion at Waikiki. A study found a $2 billion economic hit without the beach. The goal of the study, obviously, is to convince all with an interest to put some money into beach restoration before the problem gets worse. Page 1 of the San Francisco Chronicle, a provocative piece there about the possibilities of cognitive enhancement. In other words, the use of brain-stimulating drugs and devices by healthy people. One behavioral expert says he fears increasing pressure to prescribe cognitive-enhancing medications such as Ritalin to people who don't really need it. Some enthusiastic home state coverage of college football results. Here's one example. The front page of the Tulsa World says OU in big game. The Oklahoma Sooners will play the Florida Gators in the BCS championship game. A-list stars descended on Washington yesterday for the annual awards of the Kennedy Center Honors. Among the recipients, Morgan Freeman, Barbra Streisand, B.B. King, and country singer George Jones. New York Times, a front page story says hard times have led Russia to reclaim some private enterprises. The story says Prime Minister Vladimir Putin has long maintained it was a colossal mistake to let enormous oil and gas reserves fall into private hands. Now the government wants back in. Another story in the Times this morning looks at the way the market for recycled material across the U.S. has fallen. As the opening line of the story says, trash has crashed. Some recycling contractors say the stuff just piles up because there's nobody buying plastic, metal, and some of the other material they are under contract to collect. USA Today has a special report today about pollution and nearby schools, and the front page photo shows a school bus driving past some nasty smokestacks in West Virginia. An 8-month analysis by USA Today used a computer simulation to determine where students are most at risk. The result, a list of 435 schools where there are substantial health risks. Americans rode subways, buses, and commuter railroads in record numbers in the third quarter of this year, even as gas prices dropped and unemployment rose. As reported in the Washington Post, a 6.5% jump in transit ridership compared to the same period last year marks the largest quarterly increase in public transportation ridership in 25 years. New York Post, here's a story about a speed enforcement sign that apparently was too in-your-face for some locals in the Hamptons on Long Island. It had a picture of a police officer pointing a radar gun. Some people thought it looked like he was pointing a real gun. The Post says an etiquette-enforcing vandal came by with white paint, made the cop in his car go away, and replaced him with the word please on one billboard and thank you on the next. Finally, a story about the rising influence in the entertainment industry of video games, the subject of a page 1 feature in the Los Angeles Times. Many of those who have written music for movies or TVs are switching now to work for computer game companies, and some of those game makers are offering up to $2,000 a minute for their top quality music. And that's our report for today. I'm Pat Kiernan. Thanks for being with us today. We do this every weekday, and you can always go to patspapers.com where you will find the rundown of the stories we featured today and links you can click on to get to the individual newspapers where those stories were published.